Thomas Jefferson. Wherever in any country there are idle lands and unemployed poor, it is clear that the laws of property have been so far extended as to violate natural right. Thomas Jefferson, in a letter to James Madison, 1785. In the words of Thomas Jewett on Thomas Jefferson, the agronomist, in his own eyes, Thomas Jefferson considered himself first and always a man of the land. He felt that those who labored in the earth are the chosen people of God. What made Jefferson unique in his time was his understanding of the interrelationship between humanity and the environment and how they shaped each other. This wisdom and his subsequent practices, such as crop rotation, use of fertilizer, and contour plowing, characterized him as one of the America's early agronomists. The Jeffersonians argued that even if a person did not own land legally, the person had a natural right to claim ownership if he or she lived on it and cultivated it. We can relate this to Chapter 5 of The Grapes of Wrath. The Jefferson idealism reflects the tenants' reply when they said, "We measured it, and we broke it up. That's what makes it ours. Being born on it, working it, dying on it. That makes ownership, not a paper with numbers on it." Thomas Jefferson was not only interested in the land, but also advocated for the poor. He says, "This world abounds indeed with misery. To lighten its burden, we must divide it with one another." Thomas Jefferson to Maria Cosway in 1786. In the Notes on Virginia, Thomas Jefferson states, "The poor who have neither property, friends, nor strength to labor are boarded in the houses of good farmers, to whom a stipulated sum is annually paid. To those who are able to help themselves a little, or have friends from whom they derive some succor, inadequate, however, to their full maintenance, supplementary aids are given, which enable them to live comfortably in their own houses, or in the houses of their friends. Vagabonds, without visible property or vocation, are placed in workhouses, where they are well clothed, fed, lodged, and made to labor." I am going to read an excerpt from the Founders' Constitution, Volume 1, Chapter 15, Document 32, titled Equality. This is a letter from Thomas Jefferson to James Madison. At the beginning of this piece, Thomas Jefferson talks about when he was on his way up a mountain to attend the king's levees, returning again to Paris, distant 40 miles. "As soon as I had got clear of the town, I fell in with a poor woman walking at the same rate with myself, and going the same course. Wishing to know the conditions of the laboring poor, I entered into conversation with her, which I began my inquiries for the path which would lead me into the mountain, and thence proceeded to inquiries into her vocation, condition, and circumstances. She told me she was a day laborer at 8 sous, or 40 sterling the day, that she had 2 children to maintain, and to pay a rent of 30 livres for her house, which would consume the hire of 75 days, that often she could get no employment, and of course was without bread. As we had walked together near a mile, and she had so far served me as a guide, I gave her, on parting, 24 sous. She burst into tears of a gratitude which I could perceive as unfeigned, because she was unable to utter a word. She had probably never before received so great an aid. This little entendrissez-moi, with the solitude of my walk, led me into a train of reflections on that unequal division of property which occasions the numberless instances of wretchedness which I had observed in this country and is to be observed all over Europe. The property of this country is absolutely concentrated in a very few hands, having revenues of from 500,000 of guineas a year downwards. These employ the flower of the country as servants, some of them having as many as 200 domestics not laboring. They employ also a great number of manufacturers and tradesmen, and lastly the class of laboring husbandmen. But after all these comes the most numerous of all the classes, that is, the poor who cannot find work. I ask myself, what could be the reason that so many should be permitted to beg who are willing to work, in a country where there is a very considerable proportion of uncultivated lands? These lands are kept idle mostly for the sake of game. It should seem, then, that it must be because of the enormous wealth of the priorities which places them above attention to the increase of their revenues by permitting these lands to be labored. I am conscious that an equal division of property is impracticable, but the consequences of this enormous inequality producing so much misery to the bulk of mankind, legislators cannot invent too many devices for subdividing property, only taking care to let their subdividers go hand in hand with the natural effects of the human mind. Whenever there is in any country uncultivated lands and unemployed poor, it is clear that the laws of property have been so far extended as to violate natural right. The earth is given as a common stock for man to labor and live on. If for the encouragement of industry we allow it to be appropriated, we must take care that other employment be furnished to those excluded from the appropriation. If we do not, the fundamental right to labor the earth returns to the unemployed. It is too soon yet in our country to say that every man who cannot find employment but who can find uncultivated land shall be at liberty to cultivate it, paying a moderate rent. But it is not too soon to provide by every possible means that as few as possible shall be without a little portion of land. The small landholders are the most precious part of the state. Though we cannot relieve all the distressed, we should relieve as many as we can. Thomas Jefferson to Maria Cosway in 1786.